Okay, what up, friendos? We're talking about Ubisoft, like always, right? This one's a bit of a weird one because everyone's sort of losing their mind about information we've known about for forever, basically. But because it's Ubisoft, there's like a inherent hysteria to it because everyone hates Ubisoft for perfectly valid and reasonable reasons most of the time. It's a shit company. It's a shit company that have been doing anti-consumer things for forever. So basically, whenever there's a headline saying Ubisoft does thing that is industry standard, obviously the industry standards part is cut off for context, and then everyone loses their mind about how bad Ubisoft is. And I think reasonably we should criticize companies for how bad they are when it's just them doing it and not for the same thing they're doing that everyone is doing. And this has come to light because of a lawsuit where two people have tried to sue Ubisoft for taking a game offline, a game that people paid for. And the good thing about this, aside from like a bunch of people not understanding that, again, as we're going to go over in a minute, this is just how the industry works now, and people were shouting from the rooftop for many years and nobody really listened until now, I guess. But the good thing is, with so many people now becoming aware, maybe something will change here, because this obviously sucks, and it sucked for a long time. So Ubisoft, the Crew lawsuit, insists we do not own the games we buy. Yes, that's right. Quote, the reality is consumers were explicitly notified at the time of purchase they were purchasing a license. People, I guess, don't understand this, but this is just true, again, everywhere. Steam specifically, there's a law that was enacted in California that basically said companies needed to do a better job of warning people of what they're buying when they buy digital. And Steam's adherence to this, as Steam's adherence usually is ahead of time. They put in the purchase of a digital product grants a license for the product on Steam. Now, that might not mean anything to a lot of people, but what is a license? A license is you essentially have paid for access to use this thing. You don't own the thing. And this is on Steam, the largest video game storefront for PC gamers, and the one that everyone props up as like being the best, which, reasonably it is. We all know Steam's the boy. But obviously, even if Steam's doing this, then why are we outraged about Ubisoft doing it? It's just kind of because nobody likes Ubisoft, realistically. But they say Ubisoft insists buying a game doesn't give players unfettered ownership rights to it, only a limited license to access the game. This is news, I guess. But yeah, this is what digital is. This is what everybody should know this by now. It's been years, which is, let me remind you, why consoles are now selling without disk drives and things, because they want to say, oh, there's less of the ones with a disk drive. Oh, there's, you save money if you don't buy a disk drive, and who even buys discs anymore? And it's because they want you to own digital, because when you buy a license for something, you can't trade it. You can't go and lend the disc to your friend and have them play the game. You can't take it to GameStop and get $7 for your fucking $70 brand new game in trading value. Like, they want you to buy digital, because all you're doing then is just acquiring a license for something that they will inevitably later on shut down. And what rights do you have? Well, we'll see what happens as consumer protections progress and things like that, because I can't believe that places like the EU are going to allow for this to just continue with, again, it's not clear, because we're seeing now that most people simply do not understand you're buying a license when you buy on Steam, when you buy anywhere, basically, other than, like, I think GOG, you own the games digitally, and you're having increasingly less ability to buy games physically. They're phasing out physical for you to rent digital, essentially. You will own nothing and you'll be happy, is basically the future that we bought into for the sake of convenience. It was fun and it was cool to go to your local game store and buy a digital game at midnight release or whatever. That was a really cool experience for those of us who got to do it. But obviously, when people started being able to buy things on Steam just sat at your computer without leaving, you open the door for this fully digital future. And when it comes to games that a company is selling to you as a license, they will, if they're not doing well, of course they're going to close the game down. Do I like that that's a thing? No. Do I think it would be a really much better consumer approach to basically, if you're going to shut down a game, give people the files that allow them to play the game that they purchased and run their own servers? Will they do that? Probably not. Do I think that's like the future of more reasonable idea of digital ownership? Yeah, of course. You should own the things you spend the money on. And there's a lot of people saying now, basically, oh, if we don't own the games, then piracy is not stealing, right? You're not stealing anything if we don't own it anyway. Obviously not going to hold up in court if you argue that one in your defense, I'd imagine. But that's basically where we've got to with this. People finally understanding that digital just is. It is what it is. But it is interesting when you look through the comments of people. I mean, yeah, I don't own any Ubisoft games because I haven't bought any recently. This makes me want to buy games from the publisher even less. Sucks because Shadows looks pretty freaking sweet. Nice reminder that we need physical media to stay. Yeah, absolutely. But this, again, is nothing to do with Ubisoft. They're not doing anything differently to anybody else other than due to a lawsuit being forced to say it. Say the quiet part out loud. But again, Steam is literally doing this on their storefront. You can go and see it, and there's a bunch of articles from back in the day where they have to point this out. Steam's response to the new law here, although the law won't take full effect until the coming year, some companies already started making changes to comply with the upcoming regulations. Steam has updated the storefront. When you buy a game on Steam, you're notified upfront that you're purchasing a license for the product rather than owning the game outright. Understanding digital licenses, the new clarity from Steam about digital ownership raises important questions about the nature of digital purchases. A license, in simple terms, is permission to access and use content provided by the service. You're paying for the right to play a game or use an app, but you don't own the files outright. If you are used to physical media like DVDs and CDs, this might seem strange because with physical copies you own the product itself. However, with digital content, ownership doesn't work similarly. This has obviously raised a question when this inevitably comes up at least once a year or so. People always ask like, oh, then what would happen to my Steam account if Valve just randomly, vanished? And Valve have said repeatedly that they either have a system or would implement a system to give you access to your library. But that's not really the biggest issue, is it? Because a lot of the games that we buy are always going to be reliant on DRMs and other launchers and other, software running and servers running and things to be able to play the game that we paid money for. That's, I think, the biggest thing that people really need to focus on. Not, oh, Ubisoft's bad. They are. Ubisoft, whatever. They are. But the big conversation here to be had is, how do we move this forward into actual fucking consumer ownership for digital products? This is one of those things that the change is only ever going to come from regulation, because there is no incentive for companies to do this on their own. I mean, why would they? They don't have to care. Until somebody forces them, it's just not going to change. You could inform every gamer on the planet right now and say, oh, digital ownership is not ownership. You don't own anything. We should stop buying those things. And the vast majority of them are still going to buy the game digitally because they just don't give a fuck. They don't foresee any problems going forward. It's very easy to think like, oh, whatever, I'll buy the game and it's going to be up for the time I'm going to play it anyway, and then just sort of like ignore the issues of how that leads to a more fucked up future. But that's just realistically where most people are at with it. Ubisoft are fucking nuts, man. It's just the industry, bro. It's just the industry. Took two Ubisoft gamers to court at the end of last year, stating they'd been under the impression they were paying to own and possess a video game the crew instead of paying for a limited license to use the crew. I don't know how this is going to work out in court, to be honest. Not done any research into this personally. Somebody can let me know whether or not this is like something that's likely to work out. using common sense doesn't work with the law because it's not a common sense thing. It's about the things that already exist and what specifically you're arguing and how that fits into the parameters of what's being argued. And the example here, imagine you buy a pinball machine, years later you enter your den to go play it, only to discover that all the paddles are missing and the pinball and bumpers are gone, and the monitor proudly displayed your unassailable high score is removed, the initial lawsuit read. But you didn't buy that. As much as I hate that this exists, at the end of the day, I think EULAs and in terms of services and things where you fucking press one button, something pops up that they know nobody's reading. Nobody's reading that shit ever. The fine print being hidden in there, which should be very easy to understand for consumers if you printed it out in like one sentence to warn them. There's a reason companies do things that way. And I think legally it should be on platforms and anybody selling a product. And we've seen this with the new EU laws coming in, by the way, around like video game monetization and things, which I might touch on in a little while. The companies should be responsible and forced to comply to the laws of, if this is what digital ownership is going to be, you need, when you press the buy button, it should pop up with a box that says in plain, simple to understand English, you are buying a digital license, you do not own this product. If you wish to own the product, buy physical. Something along those lines, and then there would be no argument. But I know enough about the law to know that when you argue, oh, I thought I was buying a full game that I own, they are just going to say, look at the terms of service you agreed to when you purchased this product. It clearly states you're buying a license and you do not own the game. And whether or not that is upheld on like some kind of consumer protection basis, I think Ubisoft probably wins that unless there's something I'm missing. Obviously doesn't mean I agree. The law just is the law. It is what it is. But they are suing in California. So that does change things because California is one of the places where you are probably more likely to win based on consumer protections. California and Germany are the two places you probably want this lawsuit to be heard, if that's what you're going for. But this is the crux of the matter, right? For games that you buy, whether or not we're going to argue about digital licenses or not, again, I think the ability to buy digital is good, but I do think you should own the things you buy. The big important part here is when you're buying a product and they just shut down the server and you just cannot play the game. That's the big issue, at least for me right now. The ownership thing, again, will only change with regulation, and hopefully that is something that comes into play at some point. But plaintiffs allege that they purchased physical copies of the crew under the belief they were obtaining unfettered access to the game in perpetuity. Plaintiffs also take issue with the fact that Ubisoft did not offer to create an offline single-player option of the game, otherwise known as a patch, when it shut down the crew servers in March 2024. The essence of the plaintiff's complaint is that Ubisoft allegedly misled purchasers of the video game The Crew into believing they were purchasing unfettered ownership rights in the game, rather than a limited license to access the game. But the reality is that consumers received the benefit of their bargain and were explicitly notified at the time of purchase that they were purchasing a license. Not wrong. But obviously it fucking sucks, right? And then they hit them with the response also adds that the Xbox and PlayStation packaging clearly contains a, quote, clear and conspicuous notice in all capital letters that Ubisoft may cancel access to one or more specific online features upon a 30-day prior notice. When most people read this, they don't in their brain think, we can shut down the entire game that you bought and you just no longer have access to it. That's not what people hear when they read that. What enters their brain when they read that. But as pointed out here, California put in this new law basically warning you have to warn consumers that they're buying a license. But as they point out, IGN points out here, there's nothing that prevents companies from yanking content away from you. But at least I'll have to warn you about the true nature of your purchase before you click that button. But this is one of those things, again, I don't understand how we're in 2025 and people don't know that they're buying licenses, because again, it warns you. Everyone's talked about it. It's super easy to look up. I mean, you just Google buying licenses for video games and every article will tell you the same thing. I do think this is good that it's now getting eyeballs again, but this happens every year, like I said. This is the issue with the digital future. Convenience, awesome. Streaming, watching your stuff on Netflix or whatever, buying video games on Steam or on the PlayStation Network or whatever, cool. You can make an argument, too big to fail. Those games are those services are never going to go down. But as we've seen many times, it's not even necessarily whether the main service goes down, but you're buying things that are contingent on companies running servers. And you can have the discussion, you can have an argument of, should a company be legally required to run a server that's costing them money for a game that no longer makes money? I don't think you're going to win that legally. I don't think anyone's ever going to uphold that. But I think the reasonable thing is you buy a digital CD key for a game, you own the game, and that gives you access to, in perpetuity, download the game. And if a game requires an online component and it shuts down, they should be legally obligated to essentially release like the ability to connect locally to other people, not locally, to connect over the internet and make your own IP lobby where you're hosting it yourself, or like Satisfactory or anything else, Rust, whatever. You can rent a server box and put the game on and play with your friends or whatever. That should be legally required for games that are perpetually online. And for a game that has a single player mode that is just shut down because they shut down access to their DRM or their servers or whatever, that should be obviously fucking disqualifying completely. You should just be able to have access to your game if it has a single player mode. I think all this shit's like massively common sense. I think pretty much everybody's going to agree. It's kind of like preaching to the choir. And there's going to be some people that hear this and think, Kira defending Ubisoft again. He's so woke, isn't he? But this is just realistically how the industry works. And if you disagree, you just simply haven't been paying attention. Realistically, if not California, and does it even matter if California does it? I think the EU is more likely within the coming years to address digital ownership, because they're currently going through and addressing things like microtransactions. Previously, they have tried to address things like loot boxes, and hopefully that means at some point they say, okay, digital goods are no longer licenses. You own the thing, and you have an obligation if you're going to sell something to give people access to the thing that they bought, regardless of whether you pull down the service or not. And I'm not exactly sure a lawsuit's gonna move the industry in any way, but at least people are talking about it, and hopefully that means regulators are gonna also start talking about it. There we go. Thanks for watching as always. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you want to see me cover something specific, drop it in my emails. There's a email link in the about section of the YouTube channel. Go to Discord. Discord's open. DMs are open on Twitter and all things like that. And check out things like GameSups. Look at these cool sweatpants. Don't look at my feet, you fucking absolute weirdos. You can get these sweatpants and more at the link in the video description from GamerSups. If you use my code, you get a discount, and any money that you spend, I get a percentage of, which is fucking awesome. Win-win for everyone. And yeah, I'll see you next time, guys. Stay safe. Peace.